What can we do to stop the spread of divisiveness? How can we understand one another and seek to empathize with people who don't look like us, act like us, or even think like us? I believe this understanding is vital. And today I'm hosting one amazing veteran who has founded an organization that is on the front lines of healing our fractured communities through coffee, conversation, and advocacy. Jake Harriman, how are you doing today?
Great. It's great to be here.
Awesome. Well, it's so wonderful to have you. Today, we are kicking off season 3 of the Stories of Service podcast. So third year of doing this, and couldn't be more proud to continue this work and continue to bring you guests who have amazing stories and who are talking about things that truly matter. So Jake Harriman graduated with distinction from the United States Naval Academy and served 7.5 years in the U.S. Marine Corps as a platoon commander in both the Infantry and Force Recon. During his military service, he led 4 operational deployments, including 2 combat tours in Iraq. And then following his service, he enrolled at Stanford Graduate School of Business to gain the business acumen he needed to follow this new direction. And while at Stanford, he founded the Nuru International to eradicate extreme poverty in the world's most unstable, vulnerable regions and to help end violent extremism. Due to the desperate condition of the U.S. political system, he's now turned his attention to helping protect the American democratic experiment, which he fears is on the brink of failure, a failure that could have more terrible global consequences. And by doing that, he founded More Perfect Union, a veteran-led movement to heal the divide in the nation by creating meaningful connections through civics, service, and leadership. He's now also the co-founder and CEO of American Leads, a movement to build the new Republican Party for pragmatic, country-first conservatives. He's received several honors, including the Unsung Hero of Compassion presented by the Dalai Lama, White House Champion of Change, Presidential Leadership Scholar, 100 Most Intriguing Entrepreneurs presented by Goldman Sachs. The list goes on and on. He's been interviewed by ABC, BBC, World Service, CNN, Fox Business, MSNBC, and so many more. Welcome again, Jake.
Thank you so much. I hated that you read that bio, but thank you.
Well, I had to just kind of hit the highlights just so that people know who we're talking to and why we're having this conversation and why I chose you to bring about this type of discussion. So first off, I would love to know what inspired you. I ask all my guests this who are veterans. What inspired you to join the Navy and go to the Naval Academy?
Yeah, well, my dad had been in the Navy. He was he was a signalman on an aircraft carrier on the USS Midway during Vietnam. Yeah, in the Gulf of Tonkin. He was in 4 years. Didn't talk about it, much, but I remember, we grew up in poverty in West Virginia. We had a little black and white TV, and I remember every 4th of July we would watch the parades, on that little TV, and my dad would always kind of tear up, and I never really understood what was going on, because my dad was this tough guy and he never cried, and I didn't really understand that as a kid. And then over time, I began to realize he had several close friends who were Marines who paid the ultimate sacrifice in Vietnam. And he lost a lot of good friends. And he understood the cost of freedom, like a lot of our parents and our grandparents, those generations did. And now the post 9/11 generation does as well. And I felt over time that this pull, this call to serve like my dad had done. It was I was not compelled to. It was something. I didn't have a long list of folks in my family who had been generals and admirals and all this other stuff. It was just my dad. He had an uncle who had been on Iwo Jima, which I didn't find out too much later. But I just felt this pull to serve the country. Both my parents had always served others. It's a pattern that I'd learned a lot from them in serving other people and serving kind of the greater good and a greater cause. We lived in a small farming community. My mother always taught me that there were always those who were in greater need than we were. We needed to be helping those folks, and whether it was cutting firewood or delivering food in the winter to folks who were struggling, it really kind of burned in me a desire to serve other people. And it definitely came as a result of my parents.
Awesome. So once you got out of the Naval Academy, what was the designator that you chose and why?
So it was really interesting. I learned one of my most important lessons in my career coming straight out of the Naval Academy. When I was at the Naval Academy first, I wanted to be a Navy SEAL. That was my goal. We had, I think, 15 spots for buds coming out of the academy. There were about 300 guys in my class that wanted those slots. We all worked hard. We all competed for those slots. And I think I made it to the last maybe 20. and we went home for Thanksgiving break, and they were to call us to let us know whether or not we made the cut. And sure enough, I got the call, and I did not make the cut. And it was one of the most, I was heartbroken. It was one of the most important lessons I think I had learned to that point. I'd never failed at anything, that I really cared about up to that point. And this was a failure, and I was crushed. My ego was crushed.
Sure.
My hopes were crushed. All this stuff, and I had picked Marine Corps ground second at the academy, was my second pick. But looking back, I'm really relieved that I got into the Marine Corps. As I stepped into the Marine Corps, nothing wrong with SEALs. I've got a lot of really great buddies who are SEALs. But as I stepped into the Marine Corps, I found my tribe. This was a group of individuals who I formed incredibly tight bonds with. I learned so much from the Marines that I led in my units, first in the infantry and then a unit called Force Recon after that. I learned so much from those Marines about leadership, about life, and we formed bonds that to this day are closer than blood. And it was an incredible experience. So what started, what I thought at the time was just a complete end of my career and a tragedy, ended up being an incredibly important life lesson that I learned from. And by the way, one of the most important things I learned out of that was humility. I began to learn a lot about humility, the power of humility. You have to sometimes, headstrong guys like me need to be beaten over the head with a 2x4, and told, what, you make mistakes too, and you're flawed too, and you can learn too. I was too arrogant, and that is a theme that has been often come up in my life, that I've had some really good mentors and friends, and those I led who have been thankfully right next to me and helped me, kind of help center me, help ground me, help teach me the power of humility. And to this day, I try my best to be a humble leader. I continue to fail each day, but I do strive to be that.
I think that those are like our best teachers, are the times that things don't go the way we want them to. And I think that you can look back as you age on every single time you failed at something or things didn't go the way you had hoped. And then with a little bit of hindsight, years later, or even months later, you can reflect and say, well, that was supposed to happen that way, or these were the life lessons I took, or this was the good that came from that. And clearly in that case, that was the good that you took, is that you got into another service and with a group of people that were your tribe, as you say, and were able to help you build that. Tell me a little bit about some of your experiences that were formative to what you ended up doing post-military. So what was sort of the service tie from what you had in the Marines to what led you to join to founding Nuru International? Tell me a little bit about how that turned out.
Yeah, I did 4 operational deployments. 2 of those were in Iraq, and then a couple other places. And I was with 3rd Battalion, 1st Marines first, and then at 1st Force Recon, and did various different types of missions, a lot of direct action, some deep reconnaissance and surveillance, and then also we were part of the initial push through southern Iraq to take Baghdad during the invasion in 2003. And it was actually during that invasion that I had one of the most formative experiences in my life that really began to radically change the trajectory in my life. So in the early days of the war, we were advancing through southern Iraq and along what was called Highway 7, which was the main avenue of approach for American forces during that time. And southern Iraq at the time was one of the poorest places in the world. Saddam had been pressing the population in the south. There was a terrible food problem and hunger problem, a lack of services, of education and healthcare services for kids. It was a really desperate situation. And what had been happening as we moved through the south was the regular Iraqi army was retreating to make a final stand in Baghdad. And Saddam was pushing his Fedayeen soldiers south, and they were going hut to hut in these rural villages, coercing these poor farmers to fight us, essentially saying, look, your kids are starving right in front of you. If you pick up this weapon and go fight these guys 10 miles south of here, we will drop off a bag of rice here every couple of weeks or whatever it was. And we were fighting those guys by the hundreds and thousands in the early days of the war. And that kind of set the stage for this really catalytic moment, this experience that transformed me. So we were the first major contact of the war was a place called Nasiriyah, the Battle of Nasiriyah. We started taking casualties. We were able to fight through the city, through Nasiriyah, to set up a defensive perimeter north of the city, where we had to dig in to await resupply. And I remember it was about 4:30 or 5 o'clock in the morning, and I knew as the sun came up, we were probably going to start getting shot at again. So I got up out of my fighting hole and started walking the lines to check on my guys and make sure they were okay. And as I was walking the lines, I looked up on the highway and I saw this little white car racing toward our position from the north. And this was unusual. There were no vehicles on the highway at this point. And but the enemy had just started using this tactic, these suicide bombing tactics, where they would pack explosives in the car and run into our position and blow themselves up. So I thought it was a vehicle-borne IED. And so I grabbed 3 of my guys. We took off running toward this car to get it to stop. Finally, the car stopped about 50 meters out. The driver hops out, starts waving his arms frantically and running at me. So now I think, okay, this guy's strapped a bomb to himself. He's going to blow himself up. And so I'm yelling at him in Arabic desperately to get on the ground. He's not listening. And as I lift my weapon and I think I have to take this guy out, I look behind him and I see this large black military truck roll up behind his little white car. And 6 guys in black jump out, run up to the car, and they start shooting into the car. And so this man stops dead in his tracks, starts screaming, turns around, starts running back to his car. And that's when I realized that this man was just one of those poor farmers who was trying to escape across our lines of safety because he didn't want to fight, and he was bringing his family. And so I yelled at my guys to take out the Fedayeen, and I ran as fast as I could to save this guy's family. But by the time I got there, it was too late. I looked in the passenger side, and his wife had been shot in the face and in the chest. He had a baby in the back whose arm had been shot off, and she'd been shot in the head, and he was cradling the body of his little 5-year-old or 6-year-old daughter who had been shot in the stomach, and she was choking on her own blood as she was trying to breathe. And for the first time in the war, everything slowed down for me, and I put myself in this man's shoes, and I thought, man, I live in a country with so many freedoms and so many choices. You know, where do I want my kids to go to school? What do I want them to have for breakfast? What do I want them to wear that day? What were this guy's choices when he woke up this morning? You know, he had nothing.
Yeah.
He could watch his kids starve to death. He could, blow himself up. He had no choices. And in that moment, I got really, really angry. And I thought, it's not fair that the GPS coordinates of a person's birthplace dictate what choices they have in this world. And that was a very powerful awakening, honestly, in me, and the beginning of a powerful conversation among the guys and I in my unit, and we began to see what we thought was a pretty critical gap in our national security strategy to defeat these groups. There's evil people in this world that build these cells and run these cells, but there's also the ranks are filled by desperate, impoverished farmers, and if we don't address that desperation, that poverty in these conflict areas, then we're just going to keep playing whack-a-mole. We can't just kill our way out of this problem. And so the aid groups couldn't reach these folks because it was too dangerous. So we hatched this crazy idea. We thought, well, what if we could take, knuckle dragger operators like us that know combat, combine them with some frontline development professionals who know how to, build sustainable solutions to poverty. And we can embed these composite teams deep in these gray zones in these conflict areas and live there for 5 to 7 years, working with local leaders to build locally led sustainable solutions to poverty and build what we call resilience corridors to stop the spread of ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And that was the idea. And when my time was up in the Marine Corps, I had to make a really hard decision. I was on a very different track, and I enjoyed that tribe. I loved my tribe. I loved the camaraderie. I loved the men in the mission, but I had this experience where I believed that, God had opened my eyes to this problem that was just so unjust, and that somebody had to strike out a path to do this different approach. And so I did. I transitioned out of the Marine Corps kind of on a mission to do this new thing.
Wow. That's incredible. I mean, but I think about like so many people have seen, Jake, what you've seen and probably felt so powerless in combat when they see something like that. And they realize that it's not this enemy that is out to kill you and is evil, but is, like you said, somebody who's desperate, who needs the support and needs a way out. How was that transition initially for you after the Marine Corps, trying to start this up, though? I'm sure
Yeah.
it was a lot of hustling and a lot of buy-in and a lot of people who didn't understand what you were doing or why you were doing it.
I mean, I didn't understand. I got out and I instantly thought, oh my gosh, what have I done?
Right.
I missed my guys so much. I felt like I had no purpose. I was lost. I felt completely ill-equipped to start an organization to fight poverty. What did I know about aid? I didn't know anything about the aid industry.
Right.
Who am I? I'm this kid from West Virginia, who's a Marine. What am I going to do against global poverty and ISIS?
Yeah.
And so, I felt lost, and I didn't know how to get started. I literally went out and bought. It wasn't the exact title, but it's the equivalent of Nonprofits for Dummies. It was like a workbook to try to figure out a way to put something together, and that wasn't working. And meanwhile, I had to pay my rent. I had no money. And so, and the transition programs out of the military were not that great at that time. And I got a job driving a seafood delivery truck to pay the rent. I had a route in San Diego and Orange County and LA, and that time was important. I used that time to really kind of process, what had happened in the war and my life and what was next. And then I had a really good friend, my best friend, who had transitioned out of the Marine Corps before me. He had also been at Force. And he said, you know what? I know you want to build this thing. You need to figure out how to build a company, and you need to go to business school for that. And I said, I'm not going to get into business school. I don't know anything about business school. I don't know anything about business. I'd never taken accounting or economics or marketing. I didn't know anything about it. But he said, well, just apply. And so I thought to myself, I kind of made this bargain with God. I said, all right, I know Harvard and Stanford got, they probably have pretty good programs. So I'll apply there. So I applied, and I said, if you want me to do this, you got to get me in. So I applied, and I basically forgot that I applied because the wait was so long, and I was just trying to make ends meet, make enough money to make ends meet, and try to figure out. I did not think that was going to work out, so I was trying all these other options. And then one day I dropped the truck off and came home, and there on my doorstep were these 2 acceptance letters. I could not believe it. I actually got in, and I thought, well, I guess I have to go. I have to go now. And I decided to go to Stanford because Stanford really focused on entrepreneurship, and they really Harvard's an amazing school too. Harvard, in my opinion, was more about kind of changing the world through its brand. Stanford was more about changing the world through its people, the individuals, and what their dreams were. And so that kind of matched more with me. And so I decided to go there, and pretty incredible time there. I mean, I had over 30 of my classmates kind of rallied around me to help me build out the model for Nuru. And I had 6 faculty members provided mentorship and advice and helped me raise money. And it was an incredible time. I could not have, I was there. A lot of people go to business school for a lot of different reasons. Many times you go to try to figure out what your next move is in life. And, people go to pivot to new industries and all this kind of stuff. I was laser focused. I was only there for one reason. And that really helped me, because I knew what I needed to learn. I knew I had a very specific goal. I had to build a business plan. I had to raise money. And so by the time I graduated, we'd raised about $500,000 and packed my bags and moved to Africa.
That's incredible. And I think that that's a really good lesson learned, that sometimes when you go in with intention, it really guides your path of where you're going to go, and just having that. And it's not to say that you can't change your mind or that things might happen along the way, but it sounds like you went to business school with this intent that I'm going to found this international organization, aid organization. And this Stanford education is going to help, and the people and everything around it is going to help me to get to that point. And so you get to Africa, and now you have $500,000, and you have all this backing from Stanford. And so
Yeah.
does it all just come together, or what happens?
Yeah, that was my the next most humbling experience of my life. So now I'm dangerous because I coming out of the Force Recon community, I thought I was super tough, and then coming out of Stanford, I thought I was super smart. Neither of which were true. And I get on the ground. I'd hired this amazing team that was working with me. Thought we were going to take over the world. And
Sure.
my first week, this is week 1 on the ground. I got jumped by a pack of thieves. I had safari ants and black widow spiders swarm my hut. We had an earthquake. I got malaria. And then the last day of the week, which was also my birthday, I got struck by lightning. And I was just like, man, somebody does not want me to be here. And this work is not for me. And so I was ready to quit. I'd never quit anything in my life, but I was ready to quit. And I went over to Philip Mahochi, who was the my Kenyan partner, the guy I was going to build this with. This older gentleman, he's like 55 years old, and he grew up in the village. He'd become a banker in Nairobi and had moved back to help his community. And I went over to his hut and I said, "Hey, Philip, listen, I know I told you we were going to build this thing together, but man, I'm not cut out for this work. I'm going to go back to doing something a little safer. I'll go back to Iraq and get shot at. I mean, at least I understand that world. But this is crazy." And he said, I totally understand what you're saying. I understand where your head's at. But before you leave, I want you to think about some of those women that we visited out in the village this week. I understand you had a bad week, but some of those women had a bad week too. Like you got malaria this week, and we got you to the clinic, we got you the medicine, we paid for it, and now you're better. But some of those women had children in that village that they also got malaria, and guess what? They couldn't afford the transportation to even get those kids to the clinic, and even if they did, they couldn't afford the medicine. And sadly, some of those kids died this week. And understand you had a bad week. These folks have a bad week almost every week, but if you stay here, we can ensure these folks don't ever have a bad week ever again. And how do you say no to that, right? So I did. I stuck around, and despite all my mistakes that I made along the way, I had a really good team, and we started having some pretty incredible impact.
That's amazing. That absolutely amazing. So you do this for what, like I think about 5-10 years. I mean, you do this for a while, right? Before you get into what you're doing now, correct?
I was at Nuru for 12 years before I handed
That's
off.
okay.
Yeah.
Right. And so
I thought that was going to be my life.
That's what I was saying. Like this was, and I mean, I think I'd seen you did a TED talk on it. It was definitely building momentum. There was a lot of good work being done in this industry. So, or not industry, but in this organization. What caused you to pivot, and how did you do it?
So we started getting a little bit of attention. So like I said, I made a lot of mistakes, but I had an amazing team, and so we empowered about 350,000 people out of extreme poverty. We had to build a global team of 230 staff, raised about $60 million, started scaling to a bunch of different countries in conflict areas. And so we started getting some attention in the U.S. President Bush and Clinton had started this new program called the Presidential Leadership Scholars Program. And they were looking for their first cohort of leaders to enroll in this program. I think they're on like cohort 10 now. I was the first cohort, and I'm really grateful I was the first cohort because I think the bar was a lot lower. But they invited me to participate. And but to do so, I had to move back to the U.S. And I remember, I hadn't lived in the U.S. for 15 years. I was always deployed downrange in Marine combat, living in these villages for 7.5, almost 8 years at that point. And so I remember coming home for this program, and I was shocked by what I saw. Like I did not recognize the country that we left to fight for in 2000. There was this crazy fear and division all over the country. I mean, Americans were just hating on each other. And you had these political extremists that got into our politics. Like politicians were running for office to become famous, not to help people.
Oh yeah.
And it was the divide. There was this awful divide that was just getting deeper and deeper. And I got really sad. I thought all of us had been downrange fighting for the idea
Yeah.
of America, against our enemies, ISIS and Al Qaeda, only to realize it wasn't going to be them that beat us. It was going to be us. And then I got really mad. And I thought,
Yeah.
I'm not about to watch the sacrifice my buddies made go in vain just to watch us come home here and tear ourselves apart. I wanted to
Jake,
do something.
did you see some of this in person, or did you see it mostly online and in social media? Because that's one of the fascinating parts about all this, is that I completely agree with you. But when I go and talk to people, and when I interact in public, and even here, we just moved to Mississippi, and I lived in London, just came from there. I don't see it face to face
Mm.
the same way I do in media. And I always wonder, is social media and is our public communications driving some of this division? I mean, what do you think about that?
I mean, I definitely saw it in social media and the media, but my experience was I saw it in real life a lot. That's what was so alarming to me. Real
Mhm.
people, people that I knew, people that were close to each other before. I mean, it was heartbreaking, and it wasn't just, anger, or they didn't like somebody or they avoided it. They were afraid of each other. People were afraid of each other.
Yeah.
And they began to be afraid of anybody who was not like them.
Right.
And to make things worse, they were unwilling to go to places where they would interact with people who were not like them. So we began to be sorted into these two silos, into these two echo chambers, where we watched different TV channels, different news stations, different media feeds, different internet sites, different churches, different social gathering play. I mean, everything was different, and we were in these bubbles where we never met people who were not like us, anymore. And this is a massive problem. How do we to pour fuel in that fire? Our politicians and media celebrities have actually actively worked to dehumanize the other side. It's actually a tactic we use in combat. Dehumanizing the other side makes them easier to hate, easier to destroy.
Right.
And that is so wrong. We have to humanize one another again. And honestly, like we believe the only way to do that right now is get people physically together.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree with you. And I think that it breaks down all barriers when you talk to people in person, because you can have political differences, you can not agree on certain issues, but when you're sitting there and you're seeing somebody with their children, or you're seeing them celebrating something, I mean, it
Yeah.
humanizes them in a way that is completely different than if you're watching them through a screen, or you're seeing sort of a broadcast, or something along those lines. And to your point,
Well,
you oh,
sorry to interrupt you. One more thing on that point that I think is really important is that Americans have begun to take on this identity. Your identity is, I am a Republican or I am a Democrat, which is, if you take a step back and look at, that's insane.
oh,
You
it
know,
is.
a political party is just a construct. It's just a group of people who are loosely brought together because they believe certain policies should be enacted. It's not a way of life. It's not a set of values. It's not an identity.
No.
Our identity is, we are Americans.
Right.
We're Americans.
Right.
And we have a core set of values that's the same. We all want the same things for
We
our
do.
kids.
We do. We all want to be loved. We want to be seen. We want to be heard. We
Yeah.
want to be valued. And really, internationally, I believe we all want the
Yeah,
same
totally.
things.
Totally.
I mean, having lived overseas myself, I believe at the core of our humanhood, we are all the same, and it doesn't
Yes.
really matter what beliefs we have or how we feel about issues. We're all the same, and we all want those same things.
Yes.
And I was going to say too, you left at a place where we were really united. Like, you left the United States and joined the Marine Corps and went into Iraq at a time when the country was very united. And so to come back and to see this breaking down, that I'm sure that just broke your heart. And you take on big problems. I mean, you took on
Yeah.
poverty. So now you're looking at this problem. How
Mhm.
did you pivot? Was it a difficult transition?
Yeah, it was daunting and difficult, but again, I'm pretty crazy, and I do think that, I for what I know the power of one person. And by the way, if I can accomplish any kind of impact, trust me, anybody can. I believe in the power of one individual, and I believe even more in the power of a team. And I think, I began to try to research the problem. Once I get something inside of me,
Yeah.
it's really hard for me to get it out. And so I couldn't look away. I knew I had to do something. And I decided to start trying to figure out what to do. I researched a lot of different organizations who were trying to figure out how to build out more of a center, bring people together. And I thought I saw a market gap. So I put together this kind of 40-page white paper. I sent that around to a bunch of my mentors, had them look at, I had like Jim Mattis and John Allen, President Bush, a few other people looked at it and said, you know what, you should do this. And so I put together a plan, a 12-month transition strategy out of Nuru, because I wanted to make sure that Nuru survived the transition, away from the founder. And I had an amazing team, and I knew that would not be a problem. And in fact, I was able to hand off the reins to the new CEO for Nuru in June of 2020, and I didn't have to worry. They're crushing it right now. I think they just had to get rid of me. And then in July, I stood up this new thing called More Perfect Union.
And that's what you want. You want the
Yeah,
things that you build to thrive when you're
yeah,
gone. And that's
absolutely.
that's that's the that's the sign of a good founder and a good leader is somebody who can step away when they've built it to a certain point and then say, okay, this is my next thing.
Well,
And
I think it's important too. I mean, I'm a big believer that as a leader, you have to hire people around you who are smarter, better, faster, tougher, stronger than you are.
yeah,
And that's the only path to success. Um,
I agree
and
with you.
uh, yeah, and that's something I've tried to live by.
Absolutely. And I think that trying to take this kind of organization on is very daunting. And I'm sure that a lot of people didn't even understand your mentors and other people did, but I'm sure when you try to explain to a person on the street what you've created, it has to be difficult. So tell me a
Mhm.
little bit about what that was like, the early stages of back in 2020
Right.
of starting with this.
I will say this, before I say, because I want to do that. Before I say that, I'd like to mention this because a lot of people ask me this question a lot, which is the different things I've been involved with seem radically different, right? Um, Force Recon, Marine community, to fighting international extreme poverty, to trying to help heal the divide in
Right.
America. Those seem radically different, but there is a common through line for all three of those things. And that to me is what I believe is fighting for what I believe the idea of America is, which I believe to be this kind of freedom of lasting, meaningful choices for everybody everywhere. Um, I went downrange to fight for that in combat to make sure that I could protect those freedoms here at home. I saw the lack of those choices while I was in combat in some of these really tough, volatile, fragile states, and then moved downrange again to help empower those individuals to have the freedom of choices so that we could not only protect those communities, but also better protect our own country. And then when I came home here, again, I saw a growing lack of that freedom, a lack of agency, and a lack of choices in our own communities here at home.
Yeah,
And so I feel really strongly that people need to feel heard and they need to have real choices. And I think once that agency is restored, and they're willing to, and they believe again in hope, things can change. So when I began to build More Perfect Union, I brought together a team, and the basic concept was very simple. One is I saw this really, what I believe to be with the greatest untapped strategic asset this country has, which I think is our brave men and women coming home from overseas from the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, who need a new hill to take. As veterans, we need purpose, we need meaning, and many of them were building successful careers here at home, but they had lost that purpose. And there's no greater hill to take right now in this moment than to help save our democracy.
I
We
agree.
fought so hard downrange to
Hey guys, if you guys can hear me out there, I'm trying to see if I can get him back on the line. I don't know what exactly happened. He froze on me for a second. Can anybody who's joining us live let me know that you can hear me, and then I can. Oh, there you are. You're back.
Are you still there?
Yes, yes. You froze for a minute. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I got you. Can you hear me?
Yes. And so I think where we left off was you were just talking about the agency and how the through line through the three missions that you had, and that's really
Oh,
that
got it.
opportunity. Yep. Okay, go ahead.
So to more pull together this team, and we looked at what we thought was the greatest untapped strategic asset this country has, which is our brave men and women coming home from the wars in
Sure.
Iraq and Afghanistan that need a new hill to take. They need purpose. They need meaning. They build great careers here, but they've kind of lost that sense of purpose. So we recruit top veterans from around the country, and not just veterans, military veterans, but also veterans from the intelligence community, veterans Peace Corps, from AmeriCorps, who've served, who've given of themselves for the greater good in this country.
Mm-hmm.
We recruit those folks, and we train and equip them at a program that we have launched in partnership with the University of Montana in Missoula. It's a training package, a 5-day training package, where we equip them with the skills and tools they need to go back to their home state and launch what we call brickyard operations. And that's the heart and soul and core part of our model. So brickyards are our version of chapters. We call them brickyards because we're trying to build the country back by brick. So in our brickyards, we use these service folks, these service leaders, veterans, because they have convening power. People on both the left and right still trust them. And
Sure.
our leaders pull together folks in the left and right into our brickyards around 3 core activities. The first pillar of activity is social connection activities. This is to build understanding. And so for this, it's fitness challenges and potluck dinners and pig roasts and fun concerts and things like that, where people just get a chance to get to know one another. They're physically coming together again, realizing, oh, okay, this person's a Democrat or this person's a Republican, but they don't have 3 heads. They're real people. They got kids like me. They begin to have these
Right.
conversations, build that understanding. Second pillar of activities that we do are community service projects. And this is to build trust. And, when you're sweating with somebody, getting your hands dirty next to somebody, you're having these conversations, it's really hard to hate that person. And you begin to build this kind of bond of trust as you're doing something together for the good of the community that you both live in. And then the final pillar of activities that we move the brickyard into is to build what we call ownership. So ownership for our democracy. And these are our civic education or civic engagement events. So what we do in these events is we'll talk about the process of voting. How do the polls work? How does the voting
Mm-hmm.
process work? What does election security look like? Well, actually, we have a partnership with a group called CISA, where they have reps come and explain the process of voting, how voting works, how we protect our voting process from foreign interaction. How do we keep the polls safe? The importance of poll workers and their role. And then we'll also teach them the democratic process there in their own hometown. How does the county commission work? How does city council work? If you have a problem in the community, how do you advocate for change to get that problem solved? Right. So that we try to instill this sense within members in the brickyard that, yes, as Americans, we have all these freedoms and all these rights, but with those freedoms and rights as an American also come the duties and responsibilities of wearing that identity, being American. There are responsibilities that come with that as well. And that responsibility is really around, we're a government of, by, and for the people. So we, the people, have to be a part of the solution.
We do.
It doesn't work. Yeah. And so that's what we do. We're trying to, our vision is we want to be the next generation of civic organization for this country. Folks like Rotary and Lions Club, Kiwanis Club are amazing. They're sadly in decline. We want to be the new meeting place for America, where with a brickyard in every small town and city across the country, kids going to apply for college can put on their application, I volunteered at the local More Perfect Union Brickyard, and it means something. It's the new kind of civic fabric for our country. It's the new place where people could come together around that common identity of what it means to be America and help help us help one another deliver on the promise of America.
I love it. I absolutely love it. And it's so vital. I mean, so important. And it is one of those things too that I think once people understand that they actually have this ability to impact meaningful change in their communities, they'll realize that they don't have to be so insular. I think right now we do have these groups and group identity, and we do have community service, but it's all, like you said, it's very siloed around, oh, I go to this church,
Right.
or oh, I participate
Mhm.
in this one particular activity. But there's nothing
Mhm.
that really unites people towards a greater common cause of
Mhm.
protecting this democracy. There really
Right.
isn't. And there
Right.
isn't something out there that
Right.
that there is, like you said, a gap in the market, so to speak, of something that will show
Mhm.
people that. I mean, I have always been so excited about being involved in any kind of a civic activity, or learning about Congress, or going to city council, but I did a lot of it around the cause of animal protection, and it was an
Mhm.
amazing experience. But the one thing I guess I didn't like as much is that, yes, there was one particular demographic. It was, mostly middle-aged white women, who participate in this one particular cause, and which of course I am. But at the same time, to your point, it didn't really get me around anybody who was that much other than maybe people that were more extreme on the vegan end, than myself, or things like that. Like, definitely learned a lot about animal protection and advocacy. But to your point, something like you're doing is going to bring people together that are completely different, that might not
Yeah.
be in the same type of cause.
Mhm. Absolutely. And I think we're in a really important moment right now for the country where if we don't do this, we could lose what we all love. We
Yeah.
could lose this country that we all love and that so many of us fought so hard to protect. And I think I'm a person of hope. I know that we can do it. I know we can pull ourselves out of this. A lot of times people ask me, well, what can I do? I'm only one person. And usually I say, well, don't get me started. That's one person. I had a
Yeah.
little bit of an impact. So typically people like it's as simple as go out, find somebody who thinks differently than you do, and buy them a cup of coffee. Sit
Hmm.
down and have a conversation with them. Talk about the things you care about, and then most of all, listen to what they have to say. We all need to learn how to listen.
Hmm.
We all need to stop shouting at each other and just listen to one another. As you have, so many people. I've been all over this world in many, many different cultures and climates and people groups and tribes. And people are people. Human beings are human beings. We all have a common things about us that bind us together, and especially as Americans. I mean, everybody who comes here and wears that identity should be proud to be an American, and we share that together. But we have to find that common ground. Seek If we don't seek that common ground, again, we're going to lose what we all love. And so that takes work. It takes work. You have to get yourself out of your comfort zone. We're actually running this campaign right now, nationwide campaign, trying to make it go viral, like the old ice bucket challenge that from a few years back. But we're calling it the Coffee and Courage Challenge, and it's very simple. We call it Coffee and Courage because it takes courage to go out there and meet somebody, another group that you're not from, right? But go out there, find somebody not like you, and invite them to a cup of coffee, sit down with them, talk to them about what the American promise means to you, listen to their answer about what it means to them, find that common ground, shoot a 30-second video together, post it on social media, tag 3 friends, and tell them to take the challenge, right? Like in this moment, as we approach this, many of you have probably heard there's an election coming up in November, and a lot of people are afraid about that. This toxicity on TV, all this kind of stuff. We gotta, as the American people, we need to put all that aside for a second. You go vote for who you're going to vote for, but then
Sure.
we need to come together, right? And in this moment, go have coffee with somebody. Let's get millions of Americans out meeting each other. Not the people you see every week, different people. Someone who's not, but someone who wears the American identity just like you do. Find that
Right.
common ground, and together we can actually make change.
I totally agree with you. And I think that what a lot of people don't see, and I guess I'm very sensitive to it, having had my own, traumatic upbringing where I felt very controlled and unheard by a certain parental figure, is the fact that these forces that are seeking to divide us, they're going to control us, and they're going to take ownership of our fragile democracy if we let them. So that's kind of how I see it, is like, I'm not going to let this divisiveness come in between us, because otherwise we are not, like you said, going to be empowered, and we're not going to be able to make choices, and we're not going to be able to do the that we lay, or buy a home as easily, or raise our families the way we want to raise them as easily. Our freedoms are going to be taken away from us, and we're going to devolve into some of the things that you saw overseas. And I think that that's what's really sad about this, is that you and I, and especially you, saw some of this stuff, and some of the freedoms that other nations don't get to enjoy. And this is something worth protecting, and it's messy, and it's hard, and it's complicated, but it works, and it has worked, for hundreds of years. And if we don't take a step back and say, we're going to get along with people that we don't agree with, because this is the right thing to do, because at the end of the day, we just want to be able to live a good life and be happy and be surrounded by our loved ones, and be valued, and have purpose and meaning, have good health. And that's what's important. So I love what you're doing.
Thank you. And I'm sorry to interrupt you. You said
No.
something I think I just want to highlight that's really important. And that is, this takes hard work. It is hard work, right? It is hard work to do the work of uniting people and strengthening communities. So don't get me wrong. This is not something we can just waltz back into or make our little hobby. This is something that is going to be difficult, but we can do it. We're Americans. It's what we do.
Right.
We take on impossible things. We put people on the moon, like we can do this together, but if we don't come together, we will fail. And so I think this is kind of, my team and I are trying to, with so many other good people, are trying to rally Americans around this moment to come together and do the hard work and deliver on what America was always meant to be.
And Jake, there are so many countries. I mean, I just came from NATO. I was at Allied Maritime Command, and there are so many countries that look to us to set the example. So many very developed nations who have many resources and who are incredibly competent and gifted in their own rights are looking to the United States as the leader and to set the example. And they see this divisiveness, and it's not good. It's not good as a leaders of these type of nations with this democratic process. It just, like you, it breaks my heart to see it. I get really passionate about this issue too, because I just see so many things that don't have to get to that point. And I've learned so much through this about having those friends that see things differently and can help you. Like, I like it. Like, I like having friends that see issues and policies differently than I do, because otherwise I get in my bubble, and then I lose track of what is important and what really matters. So I never want to be that person that subscribes to that. And also, to your point about the Democratic and the Republican and having that as an identity, again, I always think, like, that's another way to control people. Like, if you're going to, I mean, it is like, if you're going to think like every single Republican policy is valid just because it's Republican, you're not even thinking for yourself anymore, or considering the issues.
That's right. And, a lot of, not all of them, there's some good people in there, but a lot of our political leaders, they don't care about the people. They don't care about the people. They're trying to use them for power. They're using them for influence, fame. They're self-centered narcissists, and there's a lot of really good people who are leading right now. We need to support those people, and we need to get more like them in there. but sometimes the loudest voices right now are not the good ones.
I agree. And I feel the
And
same way about Hollywood celebrities. I've become I have become kind of jaded when I see that stuff. When I see Hollywood celebrities or politicians, I have to say, Jake, I definitely I just kind of roll my eyes and I'm
yeah,
like, I mean, again, there are good ones. There's
yeah,
those people like Tom Hanks, for an example. I'm just throwing that name out there. But there's people that you see that you're like, man, they're probably one of the good ones.
right, yeah,
But they're far and few between.
yeah, yeah, that's right.
And it's not to say there's nothing wrong with acting. There's nothing wrong with Hollywood or theater. I was a theater geek in high school. You know, I love that stuff. But I just, at the same time, it's like, man, we really got to take ownership of this issue and really stress to people the importance of being involved. So I love what you're doing, Jake. I
Thank you.
want people to check it out. Tell us a little more where people can find more information. Of course, I've linked to it in the show notes, but
Yeah. Thank you for that. No, it's very simple. You can go to mpu.us. So Mike Papa Uniform Sierra. So moreperfectunion.us, mpu.us. And there's a button right there to take the Coffee and Courage Challenge. There's a button right there to join our movement. So get involved, step into the arena. And by the way, if it's not with us, there's other great organizations out there too. Get involved. Just do something. Do something in this moment. Answer the call, especially for those who have served in the past. You got one more call of duty to do. You got one more tour to do. And we need to answer that.
Yeah. And I think no better people to lead this than veterans, because all of us have felt that call to service already. And it's an opportunity for us to give back and push for that next journey. I mean, it's how I feel about this podcast for myself. So
yeah.
I just love what you're doing and highly
I love
support
what you're
it.
doing.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I think it's really important to have these conversations and to speak about hard issues. And so definitely want to continue to do that. So thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to go full screen in just a moment, but I do want to say goodbye backstage real quick. So I'll just do a quick closeout. But thank you again. Really, really appreciate you making the time to do this.
Thank you so much.
All right, guys, sorry for the technical difficulties for a little bit of that broadcast, but thank you so much for those of you who stuck with us. I will be back at you next week with Staff Sergeant Carter, and we're going to get into the Ferris Doctrine. So that is going to be a very, very important conversation about what we can do to ensure that our service members are not treated like second-class citizens and are able to get the same care that they deserve. So please, please join us next week. If you're listening to me on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button. Please tell your friends about the podcast. Thank you all for joining us today back in the hotel at the Navy Lodge here in Mississippi. So hopefully get some better setup in the coming weeks. But thank you again. Enjoy the rest of your day. And as I always say, take care of yourself and take care of each other. Bye-bye now.